On this handout, we're going to first practice how to create a wash underneath your Impressionist brushstrokes, and then we're going to be working on creating brushstrokes moving in different directions and finally apply it to a zoomed in version of a famous Impressionist painting to try to manipulate the color and the texture throughout. In the first section, we're going to be adding a light wash into the background. So choose any color that you want to work with and mix a good amount of water with it so that it is a light wash or a transparent value that you're able to cover the background so the white doesn't come through when we add our Impressionist style brushstrokes. So when you're working on a final painting, we're still going to be adding this light wash in the background with whatever is the base color. So then on top of it, you have those Impressionist style brushstrokes. You're gonna probably leave gaps and spaces in some areas. So it's important to have this just in case you do have those gaps. Instead of the white of the paper coming through, you'll have that little bit of color so that it blends nicely together. So you never really want the white of the paper in the background. When you add Impressionist brushstrokes, they're very quick and light strokes using a good amount of paint, so you have a thick application. So think almost like you're icing a cake. You have a good amount of icing on your paintbrush there or paint, and I'm just lightly adding these strokes. When you're working on final projects, it doesn't necessarily matter how short or long your brush strokes are. So think about what length that you like as we're practicing through this first worksheet. Now on this, I am purposely leaving some gaps so that you can see what it looks like where there is that blue in the background coming through versus the white. It also can add an extra texture to it so that it doesn't feel like it's completely solid or painted, but it gives more that Impressionist feel where you can really see the brush strokes. Now moving on to the second rectangle, this is going to be creating a value change, so going from light to dark. So first I have to mix my black value, so I'm mixing using all three of my primary colors, getting a nice equal value mixed together for that black to work with. Remember that Impressionist painters rarely used black, so we are going to limit working with black. However, using a little bit of value change is definitely important. So still working with shades and darker values. So I mixed my black with my red to create this darker red. And starting on the left side, I'm creating my wash. So I have my dark red watered down, and then I'm going to be fading that into my lighter value on the right. So right now I have just a watered down red. And then I'm going to mix my red with white on this right side to have a watered down light red. So that's fading from the dark on the left to the medium hue of the red and then to the tint on the right side. And then I'm going to go over top with my Impressionist brush stroke. So as I'm going over top, I am making sure that I have a thick application of paint and I'm using those spaced apart brush strokes so that you can see a little bit more of the texture. And then layering is important as well. So instead of just using that dark red, I even threw in a few little brush strokes of just the black on the darkest side. And then I'm starting to blend that into the red in the middle so you can see some of that texture with it. Again, I'm not smoothing things out. I'm using those short, fast brush strokes. And I'm slowly fading this onto the right side where I'm going to bring in some white, and I'm actually mixing almost directly onto my paper. So that's something else that you can play around with, is mixing either on your paper or on your palette first, or even doing a little bit of both. So I'm overlapping and blending this out, making sure that my brush strokes are layered so you can really see that texture there. Now moving into this next section, we're going to be creating a gradient wash first of two analogous colors. So that means two colors next to each other on the color wheel. So I'm just going to be using yellow fading into blue. So that way I have that green in the middle. So that's technically three colors, but you could work with just the two if you'd rather. So maybe just doing yellow and green. But I'm bringing in that blue on the right side so that the two blend together in the middle. And this is just my wash layer first. So I'm not worried about the direction of my brush strokes as I'm adding in this wash layer. As I add this next layer of brush stroke, I'm going to be using that Impressionist style, so a thick application, short brush strokes, layering things. But I'm also going to be following the curve of this line. When you're working on final projects, it's very important to change up the direction of your line in order to emphasize form or show the direction of something moving or just to create movement in your piece. So as I'm working here, I'm starting out with the yellow and then starting to overlap a little bit of the blue into it, showing my brush strokes by blending it out into the yellow, so spacing things out a little bit more as I get towards that yellow section, and then just continuing to layer. So I'm bringing in some yellow on top of the blue, moving back to this blue-green, so the yellow and blue mixed together, and following this curve, starting to emphasize that as well. And then bringing more of just the blue on the right. So again, I'm fading from the yellow into the blue. And then I'm continuing to layer using thicker applications of paint, bringing in some more white on top. So the top layer should be some areas of white in order to really show that texture. So think about where you want to bring in some lighter values. You could even go in with a little bit of black mixed with your color to create a shade in some areas. But emphasize that movement of that line, really show that swirl, and really practice these Impressionist brush strokes. So as you can see, I'm continuing to build my layers. I'm bringing in a little bit of the white mixed with the yellow on the left side to show a little bit more of that texture, more of the Impressionist brush strokes, and then bringing in and mixing some of that blue and just really finalizing things here as I work towards the right and trying to emphasize that curve. So I'm making the swirl a little bit lighter in the middle and then the outside a little bit darker to make that more visible. So work really slowly building those layers, intentionally place the color and the value throughout. When you're working on final projects, in order to emphasize form, you'll want to try to follow the contour or the outside shape that you're working with. So if it's a circle, you'll want to follow that circle form throughout the object in order to really emphasize it, making it feel a lot more three-dimensional. In this last section, we're going to be doing the same thing that we've been doing, which is starting with a light wash, but this time we're going to try to color match. So I'm mixing my colors with my blue. So I mixed blue with a little bit of white and black in order to desaturate it so it's not a bright, vivid blue. And then same with the yellow. I mixed that with gray as well so that it's desaturated and not as bright in the wash in the background. And then I'm going in with this next layer of blue, same thing, it's desaturated, so it's not very vibrant. And then I'm starting to work in a little bit of the white layers or lighter values throughout, really paying attention to that reference picture, trying to color match. I'm bringing in a little bit of the black in areas where the black was, looking at the direction of those brush strokes. And I started using an even smaller paintbrush just because this is very detailed and very thin lines throughout. And then I'm fading that blue a little bit more into the middle yellow circle. I mix that yellow color, so black and white mixed with yellow to desaturate it so it's not a super vivid yellow. And then I'm bringing in those smaller brush strokes, really following the form or direction of that circle. So they're fading all the way around, wrapping around that circle. And then in the very center is that brightest yellow spot, so I made sure to use a bright yellow there. I even brought in some of the brighter yellow around the outside, which I'm going to go over a little bit just to push it further back. Moving on to this next one, same thing, a light wash in the background. I'm using desaturated colors in the background here. I added a little bit of white to that bottom value because it is a little lighter on the bottom. And then I brought in a little bit of orange, red orange, and I desaturated that slightly for this base layer, and then I'll add another layer on top of that brighter color just to really emphasize it and blend it out. And then I'm kind of mixing this a little bit with my blue because that's going to desaturate it since the orange and blue are complementary colors. It will tone it down, desaturate things. And then I'm looking at where are my lighter values? Where can I bring in a little bit of tints or white into the outside? Then just looking at that blue color on the bottom, I mixed some blue and green together and then desaturated it with a gray. I'm continuing with those smaller brush strokes to build my layers and start to add those refining details on top. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is start to bring in that lighter color with my smaller brush strokes to really bring in that small detail. So start slowly building your layers. Again, start with that base coat or the wash in the background, really trying to work on color matching at this point. And so you can see here, I have a good color match, and then I also have texture throughout where you can see my Impressionist brush strokes. And on this last one, same thing, starting with the light wash in the background. It's more of a pink tone on the top and then a greenish yellow tone on the bottom. So that's what I started with for that wash underneath. And then I'm going to start to look at where it's darker and where it's lighter. So where can I add shades? Where can I add tints of those colors? Really looking at the direction of the brush strokes. And then I'm mixing more of this darker green color to start to build in and layer the darker green. So I'm bringing that in here. There's some areas where that green is lighter, some areas where it's darker. There's some areas where there's a little bit more blue added. So I brought in a little blue hue and mixed it directly onto my paper. But again, think about if you want to mix on the paper first or on your palette. And then the detail layer on top, just adding those smaller refining brush strokes, really paying attention to the direction, the placement of my lines, and then trying to color match as well. So here is the finished result. Again, take your time, start with those washes, look at the direction of your brush strokes, and try to create those short brush strokes using a thick application of paint.